Hey, welcome. If you are looking for a set of different art supplies to take with you on your next trip, then I hope that this video serves as inspiration for that. I make weekly art tutorials, paint-alongs and vlogs, and in this video I'm going to share everything that I have taken with me to Thailand.
I have also created plenty of videos highlighting tips and tricks for traveling with art supplies as well as creating art while traveling abroad, and I will link that playlist for you in case you have any impending trips or you're just interested. I also have some really exciting news for you that Etchr have gifted me discount code Sketches10. I'll link it down below for you in the description, the form. So if you were contemplating joining, getting access to exclusive videos, art challenges, Zoom painting sessions and this free bonus happy mail, then join today. Everything will be linked down below in the description and I look forward to creating with you. Super special thank you to Etchr as well as all my Ko-fi members, past, current and new. I tend to be very much inspired by where I am traveling to when it comes to the art supplies that I take. So there are some things that tend to change and some things that are steadfast, and in this video I'm just going to highlight all the things that I took with me. Most I used, some I didn't, but nonetheless I love sharing and I'm always interested to see what other artists also carry, so I hope that you enjoy this video.
In this video I'm talking all things art supplies. I am by no means saying that you need to carry all these things as well. I am definitely on the overpacking kind of side, but I just wanted to talk through some of the items that I brought with me, some of the things that I've really loved using, and some of the things that perhaps were a little bit tricky to carry around, so that this will help you make your own decisions. To start things off, we're talking palettes, and I brought 4 different watercolor palettes with me. The reason that I brought so many with me is because I honestly wanted to experiment with each one to try and figure out what kind of colors do I like taking with me, and also which kind of palettes are best for me when it comes to long haul trips. The first palette that I brought is the Portable Painter Classic by Steve Padden, and this is just such a cleverly designed plastic palette, and I've made a whole separate video reviewing it and highlighting the pros and the cons, and I will link that for you. Inside this I put my Daniel Smith watercolor paints, which are one of my favorite paints. Following that, I brought my Szmal urban sketching palette, and again I have made a video reviewing this, highlighting the pros and cons of this palette. But in addition to the colors included in that set, I have also kind of added a few extra colors, and I will talk about why I did that later on. So all in all, I have 20 colours inside this palette, of which 17 are Szmal, and 1 is Daniel Smith, 1 is a core, and 1 is an Etchr golden metallic watercolour. I also brought this, and this is the Etchr Lab mini ceramic palette, and the idea of being able to paint on a ceramic palette while abroad sounded incredibly amazing to me, and as I've mentioned, there were some pros, there were some cons, and I've made a video highlighting that as well. But I'm glad that I brought in it. I was able to create my own Daniel Smith watercolour palette with 18 colours, as well as mix on porcelain throughout this trip. And then last but not least, I have this, which is the Portable Painter Micro Palette. This tiny palette can in theory take up to 16 colours. Now, because I like using size 8 brushes, size 10 brushes, just brushes slightly on the medium to large size, I didn't want to have very tiny wells. So what I actually did is created a limited palette with 8 colours using their custom pans. So tiny but so mighty, and again I put my Daniel Smith colours in there. At the moment, Szmal are my favourite watercolours, followed very closely or perhaps jointly with my Daniel Smith watercolours. But unfortunately, Szmal watercolours only come in half pans and full pans at the moment. So when it comes to having painting setups with these kind of perhaps more novel travel palettes, I quite often turn to adding my Daniel Smith paint inside them, which is why I have a separate palette for my Szmal. The only other palette that I should mention is this one, and this is my Stay Wet palette, my Gouache Stay Wet palette. I've made a video highlighting the reasons that I love this palette and some of the drawbacks of this palette as well, and I'll link that video for you. But on top of that, this palette is slightly different because I modified the colours that I had inside. I really used this trip as an opportunity to expand my colour palette, to really just try out different colours and see if there are certain colours that I'm drawn to more than others. And that's pretty much it in terms of the paints that I brought. Obviously 5 paint palettes is is way more than one needs, but it was a really interesting exercise to think about what colours did I think that I would see in Thailand and what colours that I think would be beneficial to carry with me, and kind of curate different palettes and be able to narrow it down all the way from like 20 colours down to 6 colours. So definitely a range, and there's certain colours that I repeat quite a lot, such as the quinacridone gold hues, because I imagined like bright sun and beautiful trees that have like hints of yellow in them, and the sand, and all these things kind of screamed quinacridone gold hue to me. I also had buff titanium quite a lot. I picked out my phthals because I wanted really bright, beautiful colours. I picked out turquoises, teals, just all the colours that I thought that I would see, as well as helpful mixing colours. If I had to do it all again and I could only take one palette, I don't know why I'm the one asking myself these difficult questions. If I could only take one palette, it would be this one, and that's because I love my Roman Szmal palette. I love how flexible this is. I love the fact that I can put half pans in it, full pans in it, that I can put my tubes and turn them into pans and add them in it. I love the fact that I can use magnets with it. I think as much as I love and appreciate the designs for everything else, just having a metal tin with my favourite paints goes a long way. Followed very quickly by the Portable Painter Classic, because I love having 18 colours. I love the ergonomic design of it. The only reason that it wouldn't be first choice is because I can't add full pans to them, and they have like their own specific pan size. So that kind of means that adding my Roman Szmal paint isn't as feasible as it would be using a palette like this. And also, I'm always worried I'm going to lose this clip. It's always at the back of my mind, especially given that there's a lot of traveling, packing and unpacking for this trip. So that would be second. This would be third, and I think the only reason it would be third is because I tend to like having a lot of colours, and although in theory you can have a lot of colours in this, I don't want the wells to be very small. So if I was carrying a limited palette, this would be amazing, but for kind of quick trips, I think this is excellent. You already know I love my Gouache Stay Wet palette, and I'm kind of leaving it out of this thought process. For watercolour, if you love using watercolour fresh from the tube and you don't want to carry all the tubes on a holiday, then this is a great solution to consider, just having a Stay Wet palette that will keep them wet. I will kind of advise that sometimes it leaked a little bit on this trip, which it hadn't done before, and I think it's just because some of the gouache was a bit more on the liquid side than I've carried in the past. So that's one thing to consider. Probably say, don't let them go completely hard, but perhaps don't have them like super runny when you add them to this palette. But the reason that it's not my go-to watercolor palette is, again, it doesn't allow you to put full pans, it doesn't really allow you to put half pans, and it has one big mixing space on top, and I like having partitions. This, I think, is super clever. It's just that there are some pros and there are some cons. I think this is excellent for those who love painting on porcelain, on ceramic palettes, and love the fact that the colours don't bead, love the fact that the colours look super bright and punchy. So from that perspective, that is great. I think from an urban sketching perspective, it was just a little bit tricky for me to carry around all the time. I was worried about dropping it because it is breakable and it is heavier than all the other palettes. So that's something that, again, I would say to bear in mind when travelling around. The only other thing is that the wells in this are naturally quite small. I kind of made all the paint level. As a result, what happened is that the paint ended up sticking to the felt. It had almost completely, like, it was pretty much dry, and it is something about the humid weather and travelling that just resulted in this mess, which I'm going to tidy up and clean up, but that's definitely another consideration to take in mind, because you can't carry that much paint, and if you try, this madness may happen. Essentially, if I were to fill these up again, I would definitely fill them a little less than I did this time, just to kind of minimize the amount of mess that I would create, and I would thus bear in mind that I may not have as much paint as I would if I carried one of the other palettes. Don't forget to hit the like button and to consider subscribing, as it makes a massive difference to me and to this channel, and it helps me continue to create videos for you. But with no further ado, let's continue. Let's talk sketchbooks and paper, and as always, I overpacked. I tend to have a lot of sketchbooks that I work with at the same time when I am home, just because I tend to like separating my sketchbooks in by subject. So, you know, I'll have one where I'll create florals, I'll have one where I'll create urban sketches, and that kind of translated into this trip a little bit. So I'll start off with this one. This is an Art Creations sketchbook. It has relatively thin, creamy paper. It's sketchbook paper, it's not made for watercolour, but this is very much my low pressure sketchbook. In here I have done portraits, I have done swatches, I have done florals, I have done urban sketches. It's just like a place that I can just completely mess around, because it just felt sometimes like a bit too much trying to decide which sketchbook to have. Sometimes it would cause like analysis paralysis, and when I felt like that, I would just bring out this sketchbook and create. Obviously, the caveat being that it's not the perfect sketchbook for watercolour, for gouache, or for wet media. It will handle it, it just won't be necessarily phenomenal, I find. And then also it is quite creamy paper, which I know some people love and some people don't like. For me, it's indifferent, I don't really mind. But yeah, so I bought this as my low pressure, use it all the time kind of sketchbook. I did that trick that I did last time that I went to Malta, where I have some perfume on the cover and also in the back cover. So every time that I open this sketchbook, it just smells so phenomenal. And this smell just reminds me of this holiday. Following that, I brought this. So this is the Bao Hong Academy watercolor block. It's 18 by 12.5 centimeters. It's 100% cotton and 300 GSM. And I just brought it because I really enjoy the paper, and ultimately I wanted the freedom of being able to create anything without it being committed to a sketchbook. And that's where blocks come in really handy. Also, because they are glued on all four sides, if I want to go really heavy with the water, then I am able to do that. Following that, I brought this. So this is a moleskin watercolor album, or watercolor sketchbook. It has 200 GSM paper. It's white paper on the inside. It's cold pressed, has a bit of tooth to it. And although moleskins are now no longer my favorite sketchbooks when it comes to watercolor, they are still great. They can handle wet mediums relatively well. The reason that it's not my favorite is purely because of the fact that sometimes it's like the size, it's almost as if the sizing has gone off, or the watercolor doesn't quite lay on it as it should. It almost gets repelled. It works fine with gouache, so I find that if it's not working with watercolor, I'll try washing it instead. But the reason that I absolutely love this sketchbook specifically is because it's my urban sketching sketchbook, my holiday urban sketching sketchbook rather. So I carried this with me to Venice when I went on a solo trip last year. I've carried it with me to Budapest, and again I'll link that video for you, and that was a surprise holiday that happened recently. I've carried it with me to Malta. All these different places I have created artworks of it in here, so it feels extra special, and that's why I take it with me every trip I go until it's completed, so that I have one that will at least have one painting from each holiday in there. This is probably a sketchbook that I didn't need to bring, but because I love the sketchbooks, I brought it anyway. So this is the Etchr Everyday Sketchbook in the B5 format, and it's got 230 GSM watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton, and I brought the sketchbook honestly because I love the paper inside it. So as much as I love creating urban sketches, I also love florals. I love creating a number of different things, and the idea of being able to sit on a beach or sit by a pool and paint florals and just sip on a drink, amazing. So I didn't just want to bring an urban sketching book, I wanted to bring a book that I enjoy working in, a book that I really like, and a book that I could create florals in and relax. And for me, that's this sketchbook, the Everyday Sketchbook. And that's why I bought this, essentially. But it's a studio book, it didn't have to come out. But I think because it's a long holiday, long-ish holiday, longer than other holidays I've been on, I just wanted to bring my favourite sketchbook with me. Ooh, and then, last but not least, probably last and the best, this beautiful sketchbook right here is the Etchr Perfect Sketchbook. It is 300 GSM Fabriano paper, 100% cotton. It has a PU leather cover, and it is just phenomenal. I think this has made its way into my favorite sketchbook, and I've just started using it, so we shall see. But I love the finish. You know, one of the drawbacks that I find with the everyday sketchbook is that I tend to get the cover dirty, so it's not my favourite type of cover, but this cover I absolutely love. On top of that, it has like decored edges, which to me just makes it look even more, I don't know, like artistic. It makes it feel even more legit, you know, like an actual artist sketchbook. And the watercolour acts beautifully on it despite the humidity here in Thailand. It's just been an absolute pleasure to work with. It's B5 size, so slightly bigger than A5, so it just ticks all the boxes for me. My favourite size, my favourite cover, wonderful paper. I can't fault it. It is more expensive than all the sketchbooks we've discussed at the moment, and I think that in part meant that I was really unsure as to what I should paint in it or what I should create in it. And you know, a few things happened that just helped me cast those concerns to the side. One was that I asked on my stories what they think I should create in it. Should I create florals, which I'm more comfortable with? Should I create urban sketches because I'm in a beautiful new place? Or should I do what I don't tend to do that often, and that's just a mixed match of everything. Just paint and draw whatever I want inside it, and by a landslide, a mixed match won. That was really helpful and that was really encouraging, and thank you to everyone who answered the story. As I was, you know, minding my business and painting earlier today, my water cup that had all, you know, my paint water inside just like spilt on one of the pages and tinted everything green. And there's just something about having the sketchbook that you have been reverencing and not using and being like super careful with be completely covered in watercolor water and still survive. And then after that, I dropped sand on it. Yeah, after all that, I was just like, you know what, let me just be carefree, let me just use the sketchbook, because no matter how hard I try, it's not going to be perfect, evidently. Like the entire cup I poured. I don't even know if I'll include this in a video, but I just thought it might be helpful to let somebody know, you know, aim of our supplies is to use them, and as much as I'm not the best person at doing that, that's what I'm going to do. And Etchr have very kindly gifted me this. So this is the Etchr Slate Mini, which is essentially like a super clever bag and artboard, paint board. So it's essentially like my flat surface, which I've been using instead of the artboard and experimenting with it a little bit more during this trip. There are some pros and cons. I think it's kind of taken me a bit of a learning curve in terms of being able to use it. Some of the pros are that it's incredibly cleverly designed, it's well made, it's robust. It will hold your sketchbooks plus a few other art supplies inside. It will hold them safely and securely. You're able to attach it to a tripod as well if you want to kind of turn it into almost like a mini pochade box kind of setup. It will hold, did I say it will hold your sketchbooks? It will hold your sketchbooks, it will hold your art supplies. But some of the cons are that it won't hold that much. Like the bag itself is quite slender. There is a space at the front, but again, that's relatively limited in terms of like size, so you could probably fit a sketchbook in there, nothing much more. And then the only other thing I would say is the weight. So I think as a result of it having all these extra accessories, that means that it can hold your art supplies safely and securely, and as a result of it having this board on the back, which means that you can attach it to a tripod, it does tend to weigh quite a bit empty, certainly more weight than I am used to. And I think it will depend on your setup in terms of you determining whether carrying something this heavy would be worth it for you. But as for having a nice steady surface to work on, I'm happy. And I'm super grateful that I've been gifted this.
So this is future me, and it's been quite a few weeks, if not months, since I have received the Etchr Slate Mini and since I have filmed this video. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that I was very skeptical about the weight of the Etchr Slate Mini when I first got it. And I was also skeptical as to whether I would use it to its full potential. But I must admit that I found both when I was in Thailand and when I came back that I just kept reaching for it over and over and over again. Anytime that I wanted to go sketching or painting outdoors, whether it be that I was painting by the pool or sketching by the beach, whatever it was, it just was more of a convenience to have it than a hindrance. And I never actually found that the weight was stopping me from carrying it. And this has continued even now that I've come home. In one of my latest videos where I'm actually sketching in Richmond Park, you'll see that I changed the setup and used it to sketch and walk, if you like. And basically, this is me just saying that I really enjoyed it, and though I was skeptical, I'm glad that I can see why it's so loved.
Let's talk paint adjacent. Recently, I've really been feeling mixed media. So I've been adding pencils and Neocolor 2s to my gouache pieces as well as to my watercolor pieces, and just mixing everything together, which of course made life a little bit trickier, but it made creating art so much more fun. So in terms of the Neocolor 2s, I have the 15 set of Neocolor 2s that come with this, and Neocolor 2s are water soluble, which means that should you wish, you can add water on top of it and the colour will kind of disperse. It won't quite be like watercolours, but not only that, you can use them as normal to add texture on top of your paintings. You don't have to add water if you don't want to. And of late, that is what I've really been enjoying doing, just using it to add extra texture and extra interest to my paintings instead of actually using them and converting them to a water soluble. In addition to that, because I realised that actually I really like using these pastels that feel like crayons on top of my art and I don't need to add water, I also got a few Neocolor ones. So these are not water soluble. Once you add water, they won't budge irrespective of how much water you add. So this again, great for adding textures, and I just picked some extra colours that I did not have in the Neocolor 2s. I brought some pencils. So these pencils, I brought Faber-Castell Polychromos, I brought Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils, and then I also bought the Artex pencils, and I got them in a range of different colours. Again, anticipating the kind of beautiful scenery that I would see and using that to dictate the colours that I would carry with me. As you'll probably notice, a lot of yellows, a lot of greens, a lot of blues, anticipating, you know, the beauty of the sea, the greenery and the sunshine. I also brought this. So this is my Pentel graphgear 1000 pencil. I love this pencil. It's so odd because before using this, I used to use like a really cheap, inexpensive pencil that I bought from Poundland. You know, the leads would break, the body of the pencil itself would break, but it was a set of 10, so I'll just move on to the next one. And I just thought they were all the same, there's no big deal. And then I started using the graphgear and I use it all the time. If I can't find it, I'll spend ages looking for it because the drawing experience is different. I can't explain it. It just is. Then I brought a few pens with me. It was such a nightmare carrying this with me. So this is the Lamy fountain pen. It's a fine tip fountain pen, and I bought it because I really enjoy sketching with it. I enjoy painting over the top of it as well as drawing on top of my paintings using it, and I'm able to do that because I'm using the carbon ink, which is waterproof. But it can be a bit tricky carrying fountain pens if you're going to fly because of the changes in air pressure. It means that your ink could end up leaving your fountain pen and messing everything up. So I actually flew with this pen empty and carried the ink separately in its own container. That in itself ended up spilling as well. So if you want to do this, I would recommend having your ink in a separate bag, maybe double backing it. Thankfully everything was fine because I had bagged it separately, but just be careful, be mindful, don't just carry your fountain pen like this and go on a plane because it may end up spilling everywhere.
Now, since my trip to Thailand, I learned a trick if you want to carry your fountain pens on airplanes. I can't guarantee that it will work for everyone, but it worked for me. And that was essentially having the ink in the actual pen, which I know sounds risky. But then what you need to do is have the pen upright before using it. And I just kept it vertical for the whole flight. This did mean that I kind of had to have it on the side of my bag so that it was vertical, and then I took it out and I had it upright in front of me, and then I also used it on a plane and it was fine. There were no accidents, there were no spills, and it was completely grand. So as I say, I've tried it maybe 3 or 4 times since this trip and it's worked with no issue, but obviously you have to be willing to go through the effort of ensuring that your pen does not lay horizontal but actually lays vertical with the tip up.
I brought these two. So these are Fineliners. This is 0.2 size, and then I also brought the 0.5 size, and the numbers refer to the nib size, so the bigger the number, the thicker the pen. And this I just like using to add extra details when I am painting or when I am doing sketches as well. Although I do find myself gravitating more so towards the Lamy at the moment, I still really enjoy using Fineliners.
More random pens that I also had in my pencil case, which include some more fine fine liners that are different colors, as well as a brush pen, a Posca pen, and a water brush pen that I'll talk about in a little while.
Next, let's talk brushes. So I brought an array of different types of brushes, and that's what I'll highlight to you. I have a case that I will show you, which allows me to actually be able to carry normal brushes rather than just travel brushes. But I also love carrying travel brushes from when I'm going out and about, and perhaps I don't want to risk damaging my nicer brushes and I don't want to carry my bigger case. So these travel brushes, this one is a set that I got I think 2 years ago. I'll link the video for you, and it's essentially an inexpensive mixed media paintbrush, travel paintbrush that I got from Amazon. It was a pack of 3 or 4 for maybe £12. It was really like inexpensive. 2 years later, I'm still using it. Hasn't cracked. It wiggles a little bit, but doesn't tend to fall off. And it's a round size 12 brush. This is a Pro Art brush, and it's a watercolor brush, no wiggle at all, because it's really nice, firm, well made. And it has a filbert brush tip, which is why I got this, because I haven't really seen this kind of shape in a travel brush format. And when it comes to gouache, I quite enjoy using this shape. So although it's technically a watercolor brush, it's got enough like snap and enough body to it that I can use it with my gouache. It only comes in one size, and it's holding up well. The wood has started to crack a little bit, and that happens when it gets wet. But all in all, like, I'm very happy with it. This was £12. And then this is my latest addition. If you haven't already seen it, I'll link the video for you, where I essentially was gifted some wonderful brushes that are created by Rosemary & Co. by another art YouTuber called Paint in Hiding. And through that, she introduced me to dagger brushes, or rather she asked me to pick brushes. I picked a dagger brush amongst other brushes, and I really fell in love with the shape of a dagger brush. And it felt like a shame that I was going to be traveling and wouldn't have one of my beloved shapes. And so I went back and I actually bought myself this. And this is a travel dagger brush, 3/8 inch, again by Rosemary & Co. And it is just wonderful. I just really enjoy the versatility of the shape, the way that it makes me paint slightly differently, the kind of less control that I have when I'm using this brush. No wiggle at all, nice and firm, nice and comfortable, slightly lighter than the other brushes. I have no complaints. So these are the 3 main brushes that I have been taking with me when I go out. And while I discuss that, I'll bring this. So this is my travel case, and I'll link it for you. I take this with me on practically every holiday that I go on, because I'm able to carry so much in such a limited space. If I exercise self-control, and especially if I'm traveling for a short amount of time, I am able to fit my watercolors, my sketchbook, my brushes, my pencils, everything that I need inside this. And it's quite a good way for me to try and exercise self-control. So just to highlight some of the other brushes that I brought with me. So this is the Rosemary & Co. sword brush that I brought. I brought a small Etchr brush, the dagger brush that we discussed earlier, as well as 2 round brushes. So overkill, definitely. But I don't know, there's something really nice about using actual brushes sometimes rather than travel brushes. I like having the option, and thus I brought all of them with me. Let's talk miscellaneous items. So these are things that perhaps don't seem initially as exciting, but still can make or break a trip. Carrying pencils, like I am, plenty of them. Then a sharpener. On the other end, I have a kneadable eraser to kind of be able to lighten my lines when I watercolor. Some tape for nice, clean and crisp edges. Another miscellaneous item is this, and these are little clips that have magnets at the end, and I just love them when it comes to urban sketching, because it means that I can use magnets or incorporate magnets into my setup, and more often than not, if I'm using a palette like this, I'm just able to attach the magnets to them, attach them to my drawing board or attach them to my sketchbook, and 2 of them will keep a palette very secure. I love to carry this. So this is a pencil tin that I have added some palette paper to, so that I am able to actually use extra mixing surface, and this for me comes in very handy when I'm painting with my Stay Wet palette and I'm painting with gouache. Other palettes tend to have their own mixing spaces, but if need be, then I can use this. Extra lead for my mechanical pencil, and then some super handy tools to be able to carry water around. So I have this water pot, which I have been loving. Outside, it's just easy to pop out. It actually quite often comes with the Stay Wet palette, like this. You put that in and then you're just able to carry that around. It's just, I love ingenious palettes, and you can pop this out, add water. Alternatively, if you need to actively be carrying water with you, then these two little pots usually, there we go, usually if you close them properly, work a treat. And I'll link them down below for you, but essentially they clip onto your sketchbook. You can fill them with water, travel around with them, and then you have little pots of water to be able to use. This is super helpful, especially if you love watercolor painting, because each one will last you a little bit. I tend to start on one and then move on to the other, but you can use both if you want. The only drawback is obviously that it's quite small. So if you're doing quite a lot of painting, if you're painting for quite a long time, or if you're using gouache, and sometimes this doesn't feel like enough water, which is where this one just comes in and is absolutely wonderful. And then for absolute desperate times, I brought this. So I've left it empty, but it's essentially a water brush pen. You add water to the reservoir here, and then you're able to squeeze it, which will feed water into the brush and be able to paint. This is very handy if you're painting on the go, you're painting on a rush, you want as minimal a setup as possible. So essentially you just have this, a water brush, a tiny watercolor palette, and then your sketchbook or your paper, and you go, then this is A1 perfect. I personally prefer using actual, like, you know, brushes that don't have the plastic or silicone tips, and that is why I kind of endure carrying all these different things for the setups in order to actually have a separate pot of water so that I can carry my own brushes and paint with them. And that is pretty much everything that I carried with me. However, if I had to condense my kit as much as possible, even if it was for a long trip, the things that I have gravitated towards to most during this trip thus far, and the things that I've really enjoyed, are highlighted here on this table. So I've really loved the Etchr Perfect Sketchbook in B5 size, and I think if you are free enough to be able to create everything that you want, then one sketchbook is all you need. You don't need to carry as many as I did, and perhaps maybe have either some loose sheets or a block of paper so that you can create other things that perhaps you wouldn't want in your sketchbook. I would have one palette, and if I had to pick one right now, it would be this, the Szmal Urban Sketching palette. There's just a lot more freedom with that palette, I feel, as clever as the other ones are. I think for this trip, this has made my life the easiest. Following that, I would also carry pens. So in terms of pens, I think if I'm not flying, then I would definitely just carry a Lamy fountain pen. It doesn't necessarily have to be Lamy, but I've really enjoyed using this fountain pen. I've enjoyed using the carbon ink as well. I just really like using fountain pens at the moment. However, if I was flying, I think rather than risk this whole ink mishap again, I would probably stick with Fineliners if I could. Like, I would really rather just have the Lamy, but if I couldn't handle that, then I would probably just carry a set of Fineliners. I would carry the Neocolor tubes, and I would try to restrict them to 15 so that they are able to fit into this tin, or alternatively, I would make them smaller so that I can carry more colors inside here. I would also carry two brushes. One would be my round brush. This is my go-to round brush, and the other one would be this, which is my dagger brush. And I think that with these last but not least, I would also have a pencil. So this is the graphgear 1000. It is more than reasonable to be able to carry using these two.
I'd also bring my gouache in my Stay Wet palette, and honestly probably the Etchr Everyday Sketchbook and a low pressure sketchbook as well.
And then for water,
so this is a gem that I discovered after my trip to Thailand, but it's essentially like a silicone camping bottle that's collapsible. So I love this because the mouth of it is quite big, so I can get my brushes in there fine without damaging them. It can carry a large amount of water, but I can also change the shape of it, and then it just collapses down to a nice size. So this is an alternative to the cup that I'm talking about.
And I think that that has made my painting experience more enjoyable, which is why I would want both. I think that this is pretty much as small as I would get. The only thing that I would consider adding is pencils to be able to add a bit more texture. And as for which colours, I am not sure yet, but I would probably add like another 10. I'd probably add like 10. That would be the perfect kit. But if I had to minimize, then it would be this. If you're still watching, then you are most definitely a real MVP, and I really appreciate you. Let me know that you are still watching by telling me What kind of things do you enjoy creating when you're on holiday? So do you paint food? Do you paint people? Do you paint the landscapes? Do you paint florals? Or do you just not create art at all and relax in another way? That's completely fine too. If you've enjoyed this video, then you will definitely love these next ones, where I not only highlight my favorite art supplies, but I also share the art that I have created and tips and tricks for carrying art supplies when flying, so that you don't make the same mistakes that I have. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye. Whoops. Got my other sketchbooks in my bag. Case, but it's fine. It's the everyday. If it's in the big one, I can't believe I bought so much.
Yeah, okay.
This is actually
Ridiculous.
I don't know how I would cut it down next trip.
Bring one book.
I don't think I can bring one, but I can bring two, maybe three.
Two maximum.